little dude here, and today I want to find out where they get the sum and difference of the angles dealing with cosine. So for example, cosine of A minus B and cosine of A plus B. Where did this come from? And they get this as the formula. It's cosine A, cosine B, and then the opposite, you got sine A, sine B. And this one is the exact same, but the sign changes. So we do cosine A, cosine B, and then this becomes minus, and then sine A, sine B. Where did that come from? That's what I'm going to try to work out. So we'll start with the first one, cosine A minus B. So I start with Cartesian plane, unit circle. All right, let's call the first angle A. So I do an A, right like that. I'll call this A. And then what we'll do is I'll draw another line. Let's put it over here. And I'll call this B. So this is angle B, this is angle A. And the difference between these two is A minus B. That's the angle measure between these two lines. And that's what we have. We had the cosine with the A minus B. That's where that comes from. Now what I have to do is I have to give these points. I'll call this point P and point Q. Nice. So far, so good. Now I have to give coordinates from it. Instead of calling it x1, y1, and x2, y2, let's use it in terms of this. Now I want to do unit circle. So I'm going to call this distance r. These are r. So we really have a circle. It doesn't have to be unit circle, which is radius is 1. It could be anything. So we have that. Now let's give the coordinates for this. Well, the x part deals with cosine, right? So this is going to be cosine B is x over r. Okay, so then the x is r cosine B. And the y is going to deal with the sine, so the y is r sine B. Same thing over here for these coordinates, but instead of angle B, you're going to use angle A. So this is r cosine A and r sine A. Okay? So far, so good. And that's just based on this. I'll just do it really quickly. This is x, this is r, this is angle B. So cosine B is x over r, so that means x is r cosine B. And using that philosophy, you got all this. Now, we have two things. This distance PQ, I can find two ways. The two ways to find PQ is, to find this distance, is to use one, the distance formula, and two, the law of cosines. So what we're going to do is we're going to find this distance two ways, and then we're going to set them equal to each other. So let's use the distance formula. Okay. You have PQ equals, let's square this so I don't have to deal with the square root. Now, the formula is that you subtract the x's and then you subtract the y's. So in our case, when I go back, I subtract the x's. Here are the x's. R cosine A minus R cosine B. So I do R cosine A minus R cosine B. And I have to square this. Then I'm going to do the y part. What was the y part? The y part was r sine A minus r sine B. R sine A minus r sine B. And that also has to be squared. Now you're going to expand this out. You have to know how to do that. Bring things to the picnic. This becomes r squared cosine squared A minus 2r, then you have r cosine A cosine B plus r squared cosine squared B. That's a lot right there. Then I have to expand this one out. So this is r squared sine squared A minus 2r sine A sine B plus r squared sine squared B. Now let's try to put this together. This is going to be tough. But let's see. Well, this r squared cosine squared A plus another r squared sine squared A right underneath, very convenient. These two add up to r squared. Why is that? Because cosine squared plus sine squared is 1. So this is 1 times r squared. So this is r squared. Now doing the same thing over here with these two, the exact same, I get another r squared. What am I left with? Well, I'm left with this. You see this minus 2r squared and this minus 2r squared? I can factor it out. So that's minus 2r squared. And then I'm left with this entire thing. Cosine A, cosine B, plus sine A, sine B. So I have that. Now, let's leave that alone. Let's look at law of cosines. Law of cosines. Which is basically saying that c squared is a squared plus b squared minus 2ab cosine c. So I'm going to use that with this formula. So I come over here, and now the distance is pq squared. So that's pq squared. And that equals, these are the two sides. Well, the two sides on there were r's. So this is r squared and r squared minus 2 times r cosine. Now what was the cosine of there? Well, the cosine opposite this is a minus b. Remember, these are the r's. So the cosine is a minus b. So that's what I put right here. A minus b. And now I work this one out. Well, here I get 2r squared minus 2r squared cosine of a minus b. Okay? And if I were to factor out of 2r squared, I'm going to get 1 minus cosine of a minus b. So that is equal to this pq squared, which I can also factor out. This is a 2r squared minus 2r squared times cosine a and cosine b plus sine a and sine b. So what I can do now is set these equal to each other. So I take this one, which is, I'll write again, 2r squared times, and it was 1 minus cosine a minus b. 1 minus cosine of a minus b. And that is going to be equal to this one, which if I pull out 2r squared, I'm going to get 2r squared times 1 minus all this. So this equals 2r squared times 1 minus all of that. A cosine B plus sine A sine B. I don't know where that mark came from. It was just, smart board is not so smart after all. Okay. Now I gotta close that parenthesis. So they're equal to each other. Well, guess what? If I set them equal, I can divide both sides by 2r squared. Those leave. Then I can subtract 1 from both sides. Those leave. I'm left with a negative. This equals a negative of this whole thing. So there it is. I have cosine of A minus B equals cosine A cosine B plus sine A sine B. That's it. I just proved the formula. That was kind of tiring, and I see why most teachers never prove this. Now, if I wanted to do the sum of them, if I want to use cosine A plus B, I just use this formula. How can I change this to minus? I do cosine of A minus a negative B. So this negative B really, right here, is plug it in. We just plug it in. So here we go. We got cosine of A, cosine of negative B, plus sine of A times sine of negative B. Well, when you have a negative angle and you're dealing with cosine, because cosine deals with what? X. And here's positive B, so negative B, it's just going to take the form. It's just going to be the same as cosine B. So this is cosine A, cosine B. Now, this one here, sine A is fine. But this sine of negative B, when you go down negative, remember sine deals with y. Y is negative when you go down, so this becomes a negative. So this becomes a negative, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to write it here. This becomes a negative, that is a positive, so your answer is a negative. That is the proof of the plus, the sum of the two angles. Take a look. Anyway, that was pretty exhausting. And this is Radical Dude, and I hope that you were able to learn something.